I regularly check eBay for new additions to my Jabba collection, and sometimes I'll happen upon an auction that's starting at a low price, and I'll put in a bid just for the heck of it. In almost every case, at least one other bidder will come along, but occasionally I'll win something for 99 cents or whatever the starting bid was. Recently, I saw the Iron Studios Jabba statue listed for a starting bid of $99. This is the statue here from my review video I made a few months ago. Now, since I already had one of these statues, I didn't even really know what I was going to do with it if I won, but the statue retails for around $550, so I thought I'd give it a shot with the vague idea that I might be able to repaint Jabba if by some miracle I actually did win it. Yeah, I won it. Now, a couple things to note here. One is that the auction had very poor description and title, didn't mention Iron Studios anywhere, and the pictures were not great either. It looked like maybe a couple of things were missing, some accessories and so forth. So, I don't know. I guess it just didn't attract people's attention, but it was still a fantastic deal. But I started to get a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach when it arrived, and I could see that, first of all, they didn't have the original box, and they had kind of haphazardly packed it. There were some packing materials in there, but not nearly enough for something as big and heavy as this statue. So the railing had broken in half, and the hookah pipe had come off of the railing. It's supposed to be glued there. There were some paint rubs on Jabba's back, but worst of all, there was a giant hole in the throne as well. Now, because I got such a great deal on this, and the guy who sold it to me actually ended up losing a lot of money on the shipping as well because he didn't charge enough for such a heavy item, I didn't try to get a refund or anything, and in fact I thought it might be a good opportunity to make a video about how to repair a piece like this. So here's the statue after I've assembled all the pieces. And it may not look too bad in this state, but I'll show you some of the damage. Amazingly, Salacious Crumb is basically unscathed, except you can see one tip of his ear is missing. I may be able to fix that. I don't know. It's not super obvious. I didn't notice it right away. This broke off from the rest of the railing. And there's also this part that was missing. Apparently this was missing even in the original auction listing, so I'm not sure what happened to that, but this here was also missing. This is where you put some cups, but I knew that from the beginning. Jabba is basically okay, except that on the back there are a couple places where there is paint rubs. That's easily fixed, so you know, at least Jabba himself is basically safe. That's fine. I'm happy about that. As you can probably tell if we look closer, there's a giant hole here. That's the main damage, actually. Everything else is quite minor. But this is going to be tricky. I have here a plastic bag of all the little fragments that I found in the bottom of the box. And I'm going to see if these can be assembled together. I don't know. Even if I can, it's unlikely that it's going to look very good, but we'll see what we can make from this. The other thing is the railing was broken into two sections here, like that. This is actually an easy fix with some glue, though, and it fits together nicely, too. There's only one little part right there that's got a chip out of it, but I could paint that over. It's not a big deal. So really what we're talking about here is this hole in the throne that I have to figure out. Yeah, it's going to be a little bit challenging to fix this, but I thought it might be interesting to try. So here are all the parts that I was able to salvage from the wreckage in the box, and you know, some of them are quite large and look like wouldn't be too difficult to assemble back on the throne. Other ones are, you know, little shards of ceramic, which are going to be challenging just to figure out where they go. This one here looks like we should be able to figure out easily enough. Let's see. Yeah, look at here. This just goes right like that. So that's actually pretty major. If you can see there. It almost sort of forms a framework for the rest of the pieces here. So that's going to be nice. The plan is to just, like a jigsaw puzzle, try and put this together as much as I can, and we'll see where we are from there. Damn. Well, after working for a couple of hours, I have this left over, these little shards that I could not really find a good place for. And this is what it looks like. I've got a couple of large holes here, especially here, that I'm going to be trying to fill with some putty. And also these, some of these cracks I'll try and fill with putty, and then I'll be repainting this. It's not likely to look perfect, but it does work. It looks reasonably good, especially if you're not looking at it too closely. And this actually will fit in there. That's nice. The only thing is I'm missing one of these apparently, so I'm going to have to figure out something to do with that. But yeah, making some progress. So it's a couple days later, and I now have some Milliput superfine white. This is apparently used for repairing ceramics, which is what this is made of, porcelain, things like that. I've never used this exact kind of putty before. It's an epoxy putty where you mix two sticks of putty together and they eventually harden over several hours. So that's what we've got here. It just says to mix them equal parts together, and you have to do it for at least 7 minutes, which is interesting, partially because these are the same color, so you can't really tell if you've mixed it properly. So that's what I'm going to try to do. I'm going to try and fill in some of these gaps, and then, if it works, also add a little bit of texture similar to what we have here on the surface, so kind of a rocky texture there. We'll see how it goes. I have no idea how it's going to work out. Alright, here we have the blended Milliput. 7 minutes is a really long time to be doing this kneading, by the way. But I did it, and I'm going to try and fill in these gaps and just see how this works. So it's the next day, and we've got this all hardened now, but because it's difficult to push the putty in without it kind of going inside the throne itself, I have some sunken areas here, and especially here where it's kind of got a divot in there, and so I've decided I'm going to take some more of this putty and just fill that in to try and make it look a little more uniform. So here we have the throne all repaired. It's not perfect by any means, but I don't think someone just casually looking at the statue would notice that there had been a repair made. I would say that was definitely the hardest part of the repair, so I was kind of encouraged to move on and try the other parts, like this part of the hookah pipe, the glasses that were missing, the paint rubs on the other side of Jabba there, and the other parts that I mentioned earlier. So to start with the glasses, these are the glasses from my undamaged statue. They just have these little pegs on the bottom that slip into the throne. These seem like they would be pretty easy to 3D model, so I decided I would make some of my own and 3D print them. I decided to turn to Tinkercad, which is kind of my go-to program for easy 3D modeling, and I quickly knocked out a design for the glasses. I ended up revising it a bit so that it would fit onto the throne better, but this is the same basic design that I did use. And here you can see I printed it off in resin on my Elegoo Saturn II 3D printer, and you can see they fit in there pretty nicely, pretty much the way the other ones did. So I'm pretty happy with that. Going back to my undamaged statue, you can see this is a kind of a chimney that sticks out of the hookah pipe that we're missing completely, so I'm going to have to make something for that as well. This was a little bit more involved than the glasses, but actually not too difficult to 3D model. It's just got a lot of cylinders of different sizes kind of intersecting with each other, basically. Once I finished designing it, I printed it off in resin again in a couple of different sizes that were slightly different, just so I could get one that was sure to fit, and sure enough it did. One other item I needed to recreate was a gargoyle head like this one. This is the actual head from the statue. It's got a magnet here in the back. I might be able to 3D model something like this, but it would take a lot of time and effort. Luckily, I remembered that I had purchased this Jabba and Leia 3D model from Gambody quite some time ago and never did anything with it, partially because I don't really like the way Jabba looks here, but I remembered that the model included separate gargoyle heads that looked pretty similar to what were on the statue, so I decided I would 3D print one of those and try and use it as a substitute. Here is the head that I have printed and just sort of resized to be the same size as the heads on the throne. Looks pretty good, except that the bottom part here is actually too wide to fit into the hole, and so I decided I would just sort of cut that part off and put a smaller rectangle on there, which is what I've done here. And I also added a place where I could insert some small magnets on the back. I accidentally put the magnets in backwards first so that they were repelling instead of attracting, so I had to kind of pry them out, which is why this looks a little rough. But it does fit in there pretty well. This was actually a very easy paint job, especially because I was trying to replicate what they had already done instead of maybe coming up with my own color scheme. I just started with a very dark brown color, dry brushed some metallic colors on top of that to bring out the details and so forth, and then did a little wash on top of that. So not really much to it, honestly. It didn't take more than a few minutes. And here you can see the chimney being attached to the actual hookah pipe. Of course, I later glued that in place. One of my main complaints about this statue in my review, and you can see the undamaged statue here, is that they used some blobs of paint to represent frogs in the frog bowl and also the liquid in the bowl. It doesn't even look like liquid. It's got an uneven kind of water line there. It just looks bad. And I wanted to see if maybe I could use this opportunity to fix that, because this had come off. I had access to this inside part here. So I decided I would see if I could dissolve the paint that was already there somehow, and then if I could, I would use some resin and actual frogs to improve the frog bowl. And by actual frogs, I mean 3D printed ones, of course. You know what I mean. So just as a test, I used a Q-tip with some isopropyl alcohol on it and kind of swabbed it all around there for a little while, just to see if it looked like the paint was dissolving, and sure enough, it did seem to be dissolving, although it was taking quite a while. So I left it there for a couple of hours, and eventually I was able to scrape away the existing paint until finally I had it essentially clear. I was reluctant to use anything stronger like acetone for fear that it would make the transparent bowl kind of fog up, although it did perhaps get a little foggy from all the scraping that I was doing. Still, I think you could see through it fairly well, as you can see here, and I think it'll work well for the effect that I'm going for. So I decided to 3D print some frogs. These are from the Hutt Twins model that I did on the channel a while back. I gave them a super simple paint job with dark green and then some yellowish green on top of that for highlights, knowing that these would not really be very visible. Then I mixed up some epoxy resin and added some dyes to it to make it a kind of brownish, greenish, yellow color that I thought was appropriate for the frog bowl. I ended up filling this up a little bit too much, so I stuck a Kleenex in there and kind of wicked a little bit of it out so that we could still see the water line like this. Then I put in the frogs and positioned them. And I used a little leftover resin to fill up the drinking cups. That actually worked pretty well. We'll see how those turned out in just a bit, but first we have to fix Salacious Crumb's ear. I'm using some epoxy putty here to make an appropriate sized ear. Nice thing about epoxy putty is that it maintains a little bit of rubberiness even after it's cured, so it shouldn't break off. And I think that looks reasonably good. So after it had cured, I painted it, and I don't think you can really tell that there's been a repair here either. If we look at Jabba again, you can see what my other main complaint about the original statue was, and that is just that the paint job is a little bit too simple. Also, I don't really like the lighter beige color that they've used here. I like my Jabbas to be a little bit more orangey, and so I decided I would try and repaint him, or more accurately, that I would kind of spruce up the paint job that he already had, because I didn't really want to have to paint it all again from scratch if I could help it. Instead, I wanted to use the airbrush to kind of darken the orange color a little bit, add some shading, things like that, and just decided to give it a shot. I figured if I messed it up, I could always just spray paint it with a primer and start from scratch. But I was actually pretty impressed at how easy and quick it was to spruce up this paint job. And the only real problem I had was I got a little paint on his eyes, so I did have to retouch those. Then I added a gloss coat to the eyes and nostrils and mouth just to make them look kind of wet. I also went over the body and gave that another sort of brownish tone on the bottom there. Then I turned my attention to these paint rubs on the back. It took me a little while to match the green color that they had used. It seems to have some blue in it, but I think I did reasonably well. And then I decided just to go ahead, throw caution to the winds, and do a brown wash over his entire body pretty much. And I really think that actually did make it look pretty good. So now it's time for the big reveal, and just to recap, this is what we started with, and this is what it looks like now. And I'm really happy with how this turned out. I don't think I ever would have had the guts to repaint the original statue in my collection, but now that I had this one that was sort of already broken, I felt like I couldn't do too much damage to it, and it gave me the confidence to actually give it a shot. I really like the way the coloration on the body and the face here turned out. Looks a lot more like the Jabba that I know from Return of the Jedi. I'd be lying if I said I was 100% satisfied with how the throne part turned out, but when you think of how it started, I think it actually came out pretty well. This gargoyle on the end is the one that I 3D printed, by the way. It fits in there pretty nicely with magnets. I think the glasses turned out really well too, and they were really not that much work to make. I think I'm going to have to glue them in here, though. There's no real reason for them to be removable, I think. If we turn our attention to the other side of the throne and Salacious Crumb, we can see that his ear turned out pretty well. It looks, I think, pretty much the same as the other one. And it's not something certainly that anyone would notice right away. And of course, above him there, we can see the frog bowl with the frogs in it, and they actually look like real frogs in liquid as opposed to little blobs of paint, which is always nice. I don't think I'm going to glue the top of the hookah pipe here to the frog bowl, because it's kind of nice to be able to remove that if you want to. Here you can see the chimney that I 3D printed, and I think that actually fits in there pretty well. And we can take a look at the top of the frog bowl as well this way. There are some bubbles in the epoxy resin, but I think that actually works in my favor in this case. It seems realistic that there would be bubbles in there. So that's pretty much it. I think it turned out really well. It may not be exactly the same as it was when it was new, but in some ways it's actually better. I'd be interested to know if you've had any success trying to repair statues or other collectibles. I've actually done it a number of times over the years, and sometimes it allows you to get something for much cheaper than it would ordinarily be. Thanks very much for watching. Like all my videos, this one was brought to you with the help of my Patreon supporters, including these Palace VIPs, Angelica Brady and Jesper Murtu. I really appreciate your support, everyone. And if you'd like to help support the channel yourself, you can visit the link in the video description to see how you can do it for as little as $1 a month.